Well, welcome again to GPS. And we know that it's every week it's here, but we don't always get to be here every week. So once in a while we have had a few days until we've been able to be together. So we have traveled, and you've been to where? Indonesia? Mm-hmm. And
Correct.
then you said South Carolina this last week?
Yeah.
What were you doing in South Carolina?
Just sort of a camp meeting type gathering, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And in the meantime, we had a big Character of God weekend at our church, and Jon came and gave, 4 presentations and panels. Mm-hmm. So if you wanted to find that, that's on our website, www.gardengrovesda.com. So we had, 20-some hours altogether of tape, of panels and speakers. And there was some drama. There were moments of high drama in the middle of all that. But I think most of the people who talked to us had a great time. Mm-hmm. We really did. And thank you for being a part of that, Jon. And we'll just say publicly, that I thought that your role and the others who did the panel at Loma University Church, 2 Sabbaths ago, was fantastic. I thought just well done. And everything was poised and balanced and nuanced and just really well done.
Sara helped a lot.
You were quoted.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Quoted.
Mm-hmm. I have love.
and I think that needed to be said too. Yeah. These are real people. Probably just talking politics here, but I know what it was like when I was in the middle of an ordination debate, because we were a church that did that last year, 22 years ago. And the pressure I got from both sides, with guns blazing, if you didn't do our way, this would happen bad to me in my career or whatever. And we went to see the division president. He was here in Loma Linda in a motel, and our conference president went, and several faculty members and I went. And he's the president of 1 million people. I was pastor of 2,700. He's the president of 1 million. And the general conference president is a pastor for 20 million.
20 million. Mm-hmm.
And to feel like you're going to say or do something that would split the church is almost impossible to do, no matter how strongly you feel one way or the other. And the previous president, who is now very clear where he stands, did not make himself clear before, because he was the pastor for all these people. So I want to give respect to that side of it. That's right. And you represented that really, really well. Anyway, we're just giving you an introduction. We're glad to see each other and be back again.
Yep.
If you're brand new to the show, this is Dr. Jon Paulien, expert on Revelation. Commentary is coming. Dean of the School of Religion here at Loma Linda. Pastor Sara Colon, our youth pastor at Garden Grove. We are going to jump right into the 6th seal. If you've been following along, you know where we have been. So if you can get a Bible and turn to Revelation chapter 6, and we're going to read it. And now we're into territory that most Adventists, at least, are going to know pretty well. But I'm sure we'll have some new ways of looking at some of it. But this is the passage we've all grown up with. Revelation chapter 6, starting with verse 12. I watched as he opened the 6th seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair. The whole moon turned blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to earth as late figs drop from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. The sky receded like a scroll rolling up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich, the mighty, and every slave and every free man hid in caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they called to the mountains and the rocks, "Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand?" So where do you want to go with this? You want to talk about the context and the historicist that we've talked about over the last couple years has been that this would be in a sequence of a couple thousand years of history. So this would be in a progression after the Reformation, after other experiences. So we're talking about 17 and 1800s.
Well, I think what's evident from the chapter itself is that it begins with whatever's happening in chapter 5, and it ends with the second coming. I mean, what do we have here in verses 15, 16, 17, where it talks about the whole earth just kind of crumbling, and people just calling on the rocks and the mountains to cover them, and then
The day of the Lamb.
it says, when the great day of their wrath has come, who can stand? In the Old Testament, the day of the Lord is a major theme, and it's always at the end. At the end is the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord is a day of judgment. Today is a day when God comes to this earth, breaks into human history. So this chapter goes from the enthronement of Christ in chapter 5 to the second coming at the end of chapter 6. So with the sixth seal, we are clearly in the end time arena when we come to this.
So where do we want to go first? I mean, there's a lot of issues here. We have our usual story is rooted this in experiences of the early Adventist believers in New England.
Right.
Obviously, we're a long ways away from that now.
Yeah.
So, but that's what I was taught as a child. Here the stars fell 1833, and the dark day 1780. And even when I grew up with that was 100 and some years before. Now we're 180 years before.
Yeah.
Since I've added a few years to that.
Yeah, there's no question that at the time of these events, 1780, the dark day and the moon is blood at night, and then 1833, this incredible shower, these were natural events. People today believe probably that the dark day was caused by massive forest fires in Western Canada. Because it wasn't universal, but it was particularly in New England where the folk that were studying these prophecies lived. So,
I read an article, I think by someone who taught at Southern University, who said that they went up and checked the library of the archives, microfilm of newspapers, and the dark day moved from east to west, from Boston west. And every city got another 10, 12 minutes. So clearly something was moving, by the wind. So I think the forest fire fits, it blacked out everything.
Yeah.
Animals all went back to their barn. Can God use a natural event to wake people up and say, as a marker, to say, you're on track, you're studying, you're good, keep studying? Is that possible, or does it have to be some divine interruption of physics?
Well, Jesus used a natural event to walk on water and teach his disciples a good lesson.
Yes.
Right?
Use the wind to blow
a natural storm.
To blow the Red Sea.
Yeah, things like that. So I think in the past there was always the assumption that miracles were somehow against nature, somehow against scientific reality. And I think more and more that viewpoint falls away when you discover that miracles are explainable many times. And so I think it's probably safer to say, in most instances at least, that God works through the realities of nature rather than, after all, who created the laws of the universe but God? So he knows how things work. But there are dimensions. Quantum physics, now they're talking about 11 dimensions. 4 of which we're conscious of, 7 of which we're not. Well, that suggests that God has whole dimensions to work through that we wouldn't even observe or understand. So,
what do you think?
I'll give you a miracle that happens every day. Did you know? Did you know that the World Series was played at my house?
On your television.
Beaumont, California. Now, we don't have a television, but it was played in my house. I just couldn't detect it because we didn't have the ability to receive. You see? However, those signals were there, and they were real. And if I had the right device, there it would have been. You see? Now, to the ancients, that would be an absolute miracle, and yet we now know that that is explainable. And that in reality, you can have the full experience of attending live a sports event in your own home.
C.S. Lewis, in a chapter on transposition, has a sermon about that and talks about, from this side, it looks like a miracle. From God's side, it looks very ordinary.
Piece of cake.
Yeah. There's a story from a little crazy book called Watership Down about these rabbits that moved away. You know this book? wonderful. You would love this book. So Hilton and I talked about it. No one else knows about it, but there's a movie made on it. These rabbits have moved away from their warren, and they got to where they were going. They found out they had no female rabbits. And they realized that was not going to last very long. So they had to go to another warren and try to get a few females to follow them. So the grand night came where they had the whole rescue attempt, and they take these rabbits, and the other rabbits come after them. And they're running across the field, and they're scared, and it's raining, and it's dark, and they're scared. And all of a sudden, they're praying to their rabbit god to take care of it. And they trip over these metal fences or whatever. And they're sure they're going to die now. And they're going to be gathered in by all these rabbits. When all of a sudden, a great one-eyed dragon comes down between them and the other rabbits and obliterates all their enemies. It was a train. Mm-hmm. It was a train. They fell over the rails. Mm-hmm. And what looked to them like immediate delivery from God at exactly the right minute was a train going from one city to another at its ordinary time. And so C.S. Lewis talks about that. What our side looks very ordinary is really something that God, I mean, from our side it looks fantastic. God is ordinary. What did the people of the New England church think? Did they think that God was doing these signs only for them? Did they believe it was happening in China and Australia and everywhere else at the same time? Did they realize they were the only ones that mattered?
Well, you see, I think today, when we look at those kinds of events, we think that wasn't worldwide. Mm-hmm. It's irrelevant, because we have this contemporary view where you could be in the whole world through media, etc. The reality is, these folk were studying the prophecies. And there were a lot of pieces in the prophecies that were pointing to that particular period of time. And in the middle of that come these events. Yeah. So it was clear to them that God was encouraging their biblical study by some of these natural events happening just at the time and in the way foretold.
See, okay, so I've been listening to you
I've been trying to provoke you here.
No, I know, I've just patiently been listening. But this is one of the things that I think I've always struggled with, because my friends, a lot of my friends don't have the same belief system as me. And I tend to be a little bit more on the whimsical side of like, the universe is not against me mentality, where a lot of people think that, like, you stub your toe, that's Satan's fault, he's trying to mess up your day kind of thing. And I'm like,
you of all people should think the universe is against you.
I know, I have enough things wrong with me. You'd think I'd be mad about it, but I really don't. Like, and I think sometimes when we fixate on something, we can prove almost anything, which is why you can prove the craziest stuff out of the Bible, which is why you can, like, if you look hard enough, you can find your answer around you, right?
And your point is about the earthquake.
My point is I think when people are searching for something specific, like when I read a book and I'm trying to, like, okay, I'm going to be more positive, like, I push myself really hard to get to that point, and everything I see from then on has elements of what I'm reading and fits into that, because that's my new scope. And so I feel like people that are researching one thing will find everything around them possible that could possibly be pointing to that. Yeah, and then they articulate it as such, therefore trying to convince other people of it. But that's why I think there's so many skeptics, because they're like, we weren't part of that scope, that paradigm. You're just
what if the people had been studying in Australia? Would some natural event have blocked out the sun down there? Did God start the forest fires?
Either that or they'd still be waiting for the fulfillment. I would suggest, though, that the way that they were reading the prophecies was not incorrect. And let me show you a few things here in the text. Let's go to Revelation 6:12 and maybe through verse 14. It says, when he opened the sixth seal, I looked, behold, there was a great earthquake. All right? Sun became black as sackcloth, moon became like blood, stars of the sky fell to the earth, the sky vanished like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved out of its place. All right? That looks to me like two earthquakes. One earthquake is a great earthquake. The other one is cataclysmic. The entire world is affected. Every mountain and every island, and that's an earthquake where the earth itself seems to be splitting in two. So it seems to me there's two earthquakes. They're not the same. Now, the interesting thing here is if you go to chapter 11, verse 18, at the time when the seventh trumpet is blown, there is a great earthquake that is there. But that is an earthquake. It's actually verse 13. It's within the sixth trumpet. It's before the end of time. There's a great earthquake. In chapter 16, after the close of probation, at the very end of time, there's an earthquake where the mountains and islands move. So within Revelation itself, it tells you these are not the same earthquake, that the one is within history and the other is at the very end. So could it be that the pioneers were right, that God was going to give a fulfillment within history to encourage them, give us a marker point, and then when you get to the end of time, comes the earthquake that really fully, finally fulfills all of this. So I think there's a both and here.
Both and.
But I want you to see something else. We've concluded, maybe with some debate, that this chapter is primarily symbolic and not literal. But our pioneers read sun, moon, and stars literally here. Okay? Is that a problem? Well, in Greek, there's an expression, and it's translated into English as like or as. When you're saying the moon is like blood, the moon is literal. The blood is not.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The moon is like blood. The moon isn't blood. The moon is like blood. The sun became black like sackcloth. All right? So right there within the Greek, there's a signal at what comes before the hos in Greek, the as or the like. What comes before is literal because you're comparing something literal with something that's not. So within the Greek of this, you have an earthquake followed by a series of events affecting the sun, the moon, and the stars, at least as perceived from this earth. And then finally in verse 14, a cataclysm, the sky vanished like a scroll being rolled up. I mean, whew, and then comes this earthquake, every mountain and island removed from its place. So the Adventist pioneers, Uriah Smith, saw us 12 and 13 as historical and 14 as end time. And the argument has been, how can you do that? You have a comma, you know? How can a comma be 200 years? Now that sounds like a logical argument, right? Except in the Old Testament, you can have the first and second advents of Jesus in the same sentence. And that comma is worth 2,000 years. So you see, when you take a larger view of the Bible and look at all the evidence, some of the easy ways we dismiss what other people thought was important.
One more time, the last one.
Yeah.
You said the two had a comma.
The two advents of Jesus are often in the same sentence.
I see.
You know, you remember in Luke 4, Jesus says, I've come to proclaim this day, this day, this day, this day. And then he leaves out the last part of the verse, which is referring to the second coming.
Yeah.
So Jesus himself doesn't put in the part of the verse that's 2,000 years later, after the comma. So it sounds really logical that, well, because there's a comma there, it can't be 2,000 years, can't be 200 years. But actually in Scripture, there's evidence that that can happen. God can paint two future events as if they were one. And so here, I think, verses 12 and 13 do reflect historical time when sun, moon, and stars were affected by these things. But then in verse 14, you're going way beyond that. The entire earth is
Do you
coming
expect
apart.
a dark day and stars again worldwide? Or was that historical, all of it?
Well, verse 14 tells us what the Bible says about it. The sky vanished like a scroll that is being rolled up. Is that a darkening of the sun or a blooding of the moon or falling of the stars? Well, it could be that and a whole lot more. All right? And then every mountain and island removed from its place. I don't want to be there when that happens. So that's pretty serious stuff. So
am I wrong if I tell people dual application? That the stars happen in a local thing for New England to encourage those people in that time. But
You don't even-
eventually in the world there will be a dark day, stars falling, earthquake, sky rolling up. for the world.
You don't even have to do a dual application here, because of verses 12 and 13 are end time, but not the very end. And then you have a comma, and then verse 14 is clearly cataclysmic and final. Right within the text, there's two stages.
Well, you would be mad if I do dual application also.
Of course, I'd be mad. You know, I mean, you can't do that. Just kidding. Revelation 6 is a borderline text for this. You know, the basic principle is that in apocalyptic sequences, you don't have dual applications because the single sequence goes from beginning to end. In classic prophecies where the future is seen like a two-dimensional, then you can, you know,
don't we have to do dual application because of Acts 2? Right? I mean, Joel says this will happen in the last days. And Peter gets up in front of Pentecost and says, this fulfills Joel. No stars falling, none of those things. But he says, this is already the marker of the Messianic age.
But that's a classical prophecy. That's not an apocalyptic prophecy. And I think the distinction is important. The question here is chapter 6, classical or apocalyptic, and that's where it's not so clear.
So now so this is literal according to what you've studied.
I think that the evidence would suggest that it is, yeah. That you have a sequence here between two earthquakes, and that the heavenly objects are not some metaphor for something. They are the actual heavenly objects will be affected in these ways.
We haven't put on the air yet about the Leonide star showers.
Yeah.
That's another part of the story, is that the 1833 was part of the regular every 33 years Leonide star showers.
The Leonid star showers come every November. And so you can see them any November that you're out there, probably usually about the middle of the month.
What's every 33 years?
Every 33 years, it's a lot bigger, and every 133 years, it's ginormous, you see. And what it basically is a comet apparently disintegrated at some time in the past, and the Earth flies through the remnants of that comet every year, in its circle around the Earth. Every 33 years or so ago, an extra batch is there, and every 133 years, it's like the head of the comet is right in the Earth's path, and you just, you know, you get all this kind of stuff. Incredible, see? So the last time the big one happened was 1966, and I went with a high school friend of mine to go out and see the falling of the stars in New Jersey. And we went out, and it was clouded over. And we drove all over New Jersey that night looking for the star shower, and it was overcast the whole time. Really ticked me off.
One night in your life.
I was not happy about
So
that.
does that mean it's not true?
Well, but
you
people
didn't
in airplanes did see it and said it was really something.
If you can make another 70 or 80 years, and you can see it again.
Well, we'll hope for that. Working on it. So I think you know, we often approach biblical prophecy with an either or, and sometimes it's a both and.
Both and.
Yeah.
I have used that as a both and, but I do have the stars and the dark day coming again worldwide. You're splitting the two, and I'm open to that.
Yeah, you don't need 12 and 13 once 14 kicks in.
Yes.
That is just way bigger.
Obviously, this just looked like a uncreating of the world, and the world created order out of chaos. And now the glue of the world is beginning to fragment and fall apart. Is that fair to put that here?
Sure.
And islands and mountains are moving, and things are going nuts.
Yeah, frequently in Old Testament prophecy, the events of the end were an unraveling of a creation or a new Exodus experience.
Okay, okay.
With the fate of the Egyptians being the model for the fate of those who opposed God at that time.
What else do we need to say? Do we need to be careful about chart making? Because this has been what we would usually do, is that we would mark out signs, and if we can draw a trajectory from here to earthquake to dark day, we can put an X here, but we can tell second coming is coming soon. 180 years later, it's hard to talk about soon just because of those events. What's the purpose of these signs here? Why? What do we need to hear from this?
Well, I'd like maybe to ask Sara first, how does your generation look at this whole idea of signs of the end? Is that...
It's not super attractive to a lot of the people I'm in contact with.
Because?
I just think that I'll just speak for myself. I can't speak for anyone else. But a lot of my closer friends and I, we've talked a lot about like all of this trying to predict future stuff actually is becoming more toxic in our religious experience than helpful. And so it stinks because, yeah, it would be convenient to be like, oh, this is when Jesus is coming, so I better shape up around this time. But realistically, that just means that you're doing something for an end goal as opposed to an actual relationship or a healthy experience with God. And so I know for me personally, I've always struggled with the charts and all that stuff. Not that it's not relevant to people, but I just find that we get so distracted by trying to prove something that we miss out on the experiential side of it and the actual like connection with God. And so for me, I tend to kind of shirk away from it and be like, I'm good. I don't need to like do math in order to have a relationship with God. But other people, apparently it's their calling in life and they need it.
Are you looking at me?
I'm just kidding. I didn't know that you know all of the math for it.
I read his books when they came out, and the most balanced.
No, it's true.
Anywhere.
And
It's
I've been
his
really
books.
lucky because my Revelation background really stems from you. And so like I don't have the like negative like "Gah," that a lot of people do, but at the same time I think it really does distract sometimes from the actual message of the Bible because we're trying so hard to prove something that we're missing out on God in the process.
Well,
And-
because he has quotes, and he talks about, we should not have the last days become part of our fear today.
But that's what most people
Yeah.
live by. I mean, how many
Yeah.
times have I been told, like, if you do that, you're not going to go to heaven? And I'm like, what? And they're like, be ready for Judgment Day. And I'm like, what does this even mean? Like, I don't even know what Judgment
So
Day is.
you know by instinct what he has written from scholarship.
Yeah.
That was helpful. I mean, he put the Ellen White quotes there, and there's where she said, "Do not use fear. It's not the best motivation
Right.
to get people to come to live a godly life."
But I think
Here's-
people always do. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
here's I think the core point, and it's still coming back to your original question, and that is, what is the purpose of prophecy? And one of the sayings I put in that book and like to share is that prophecy is not given to satisfy our curiosity about the future, but to teach us how to live today. And I think that's a
much better.
crucial thing. And certainly when some of the Adventist pioneers saw these heavenly things, it had an impact on them and an impact on their lives. It caused them to be more attentive to the scriptures, caused them to be more serious in their walk with God. They were some really serious folk, and I think we can learn from that. And so the purpose of prophecy is to impact the way we relate to the things of God today, that we don't put it off and one of these days maybe I'll get ready, but actually be serious about it today and to be steady serious. And I visited the doctor today and it went well. And but the reason it went well from the doctor's point of view is that I've spent 15 years, 10,000 steps a day. 5 miles a day for 15 years without fail, rain, shine, snow, ice, etc. But the result of that steadiness has very positive health qualities. Similarly, prophecy motivates us to that kind of steadiness today.
Great wrap up, John. I appreciate that. That answered the question, I think. And it was helpful to me as a young pastor when you wrote that. I appreciate that. And we're glad for the good news from the doctor. And may we all go and live that way. While we're waiting, we want Jesus to come. We want a resurrection. We want to see our family again. In the meantime, we're going to live well. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for joining us at GPS. We will continue on and then go on to the seventh seal and do Revelation 7.